The Philadelphia Phillies just dropped a bombshell that has the entire fan base split right down the middle. And honestly, the way this whole thing went down is raising some serious eyebrows around the baseball world. After weeks of speculation, rumors, and what can only be described as one of the most awkward courtship dances in recent Phillies history, Realmuto is officially back in red pinstripes. But here's the kicker that nobody saw coming. To make room for the veteran backstop, the organization just gave Weston Wilson his walking papers, and the internet is absolutely losing its mind over this decision. Let's be real here. This entire situation has been messier than a South Philly cheesesteak eaten in a moving car. The Phillies brass basically admitted in the most uncomfortable press conference you'll ever witness that they only brought JT back because their grand plan to land Bo Naylor crashed and burned spectacularly. Talk about making a guy feel wanted, right? Imagine being JT Realmuto, a former all-star, and the face of this franchise for years, only to find out you're essentially the consolation prize after the team struck out on their first choice. That's some cold-blooded business right there, and it shows you exactly how cutthroat this game can be when millions of dollars are on the line. The official announcement came through the Phillies' Twitter account with all the fanfare of a grocery list being read aloud. 3 years, $45 million, and Weston Wilson designated for assignment. Just like that, a guy who grinded his way onto this roster and became a genuine spark plug for the team finds himself in baseball purgatory, waiting to see if another organization will claim him off waivers or if he'll end up in AAA limbo. The cold, hard reality of baseball economics just smacked Wilson right in the face. And for fans who watched this guy battle and claw for every opportunity he got, it stings more than a little bit. Now let's talk about Weston Wilson for a minute, because this dude deserves some respect for what he accomplished during his time in Philadelphia. Over the past 3 seasons, Wilson appeared in 100 games and put together some genuinely respectable numbers. We're talking a slash line of 242, 328, and 428 across 245 plate appearances. He smashed 9 home runs, swiped 8 bags, and did all this while bouncing up and down between the majors and minors more times than a yo-yo at a toy convention. The man showed versatility that would make a Swiss Army knife jealous. Left field, right field, second base, third base, first base. If there was a position that needed filling, Wilson could slide right in and hold his own. He even played shortstop down in the minors, though the Phillies never gave him a shot there at the big league level. But here's where things get dicey for Wilson, and probably why the Phillies felt comfortable pulling the trigger on this move. His 2025 campaign was, to put it bluntly, pretty rough around the edges. In 54 games, he hit just 198 with a 282 on-base percentage and a slugging percentage that barely cracked 300. Those are numbers that'll get you sent packing faster than you can say, rebuild. The underlying metrics tell an interesting story, though. His barrel rate sat at a solid 10.3%, and his expected weighted on-base average significantly outpaced his actual production, suggesting he might have been the victim of some seriously bad luck. His batting average on balls in play was an unusually low 238, which typically indicates that when he made contact, the baseball gods just weren't smiling down on him. But in baseball, sometimes bad luck and bad performance look exactly the same in the stat sheet, and organizations have to make tough calls based on what actually happened, not what could have happened in a parallel universe where every line drive finds a gap, The really head-scratching part of this whole saga is that Wilson was designated for assignment over guys like Nolan Hoffman and Pedro Leon, which has some serious baseball minds doing double takes and questioning the logic. Wilson is out of options, meaning he would have needed to make the opening day roster or risk getting waived, but many people genuinely thought he had a legitimate shot at cracking that final roster spot. The fact that he didn't even get that opportunity, especially after showing the kind of versatility and grit that Dave Dombrowski usually loves in his bench players, tells you something significant about how the front office views the current roster construction and where they think they can find production going forward. The biggest winner in this whole situation, that would be Edmundo Sosa, better known around town as Otto, who just received the mother of all votes of confidence from the organization. Otto has absolutely leapfrogged Wilson, in the depth chart pecking order, establishing himself as the spark plug utility guy who can play multiple positions and bring that energy every single time he steps on the field. This kid came out of absolutely nowhere last season and forced the Phillies' hand with his performance, demanding real major league playing time and then backing it up when he got those opportunities. We're talking about a meteoric rise that nobody saw coming, the kind of underdog story that makes baseball the beautiful, unpredictable game that it is. Don't be shocked if by the time opening day rolls around, the Phillies are seriously discussing a legitimate platoon situation in left field between Brandon Marsh and Otto, giving both guys regular at-bats and keeping everyone fresh throughout the grueling 162-game marathon. Now let's dive into the juicy details of JT Realmuto's actual contract, because the structure of this deal reveals quite a bit about how both sides view the situation and what expectations exist for the aging backstop moving forward. The base agreement is 3 years at $45 million, which breaks down to $15 million per season. But here's where it gets interesting. The contract includes incentives that could add up to $5 million per year if Realmuto can somehow recapture the magic that made him one of the most feared catchers in baseball just a few short years ago. We're talking $2 million for an all-star selection through the fan vote, another $1 million if he makes it via the players' vote, $1 million for a Gold Glove, $1 million for a Silver Slugger award, and $2 million if he somehow cracks the top 10 in MVP voting. Let's be brutally honest here. The chances of a 34-year-old catcher with declining offensive numbers suddenly transforming back into an MVP caliber player are about as likely as snowfall in July. But stranger things have happened in baseball. The incentive-based structure is actually pretty smart from an organizational standpoint, and it's something we're seeing more and more in modern baseball contracts. It creates a hunger, a motivation for players to prove they've still got it, to silence the doubters, and show the world they're not washed up just yet. With Realmuto specifically, the Phillies need that fire in his belly, that competitive edge that made him special in the first place. This is a guy who, at his peak, was legitimately the best all-around catcher in baseball, calling games like a maestro conducting a symphony, throwing out base runners with ease, and providing genuine offensive production from a position that typically operates as a black hole in the batting order. If Philadelphia can tap into even 75% of peak JT, they'll be getting tremendous value from this deal. The problem is, and this is where reality comes crashing down like a cold bucket of water, players in their mid to late 30s just don't randomly rediscover the fountain of youth, especially catchers whose bodies have taken an absolute beating over thousands of innings squatting behind the plate. Speaking of Realmuto's recent performance, let's look at what he actually gave the Phillies last season, because the numbers paint a picture that's concerning no matter how you try to spin it. In his age 33 season, JT hit 12 home runs and drove in 52 runs across 502 at-bats. His on-base percentage sat at a mediocre .315, and his slugging percentage barely cracked .400 at .385. He collected 129 hits and struck out 129 times, a 1-to-1 ratio that shows the pop in his bat has diminished significantly from his prime years. The power numbers are what really stand out as problematic. This is supposed to be a middle-of-the-order bat, a guy who can change the game with one swing, but 12 homers over a full season from the cleanup spot just doesn't cut it when you're trying to compete for a World Series championship. But here's the thing that keeps getting mentioned every time someone criticizes JT's offensive decline. There's so much more to catching than just hitting the baseball. The intangibles that Realmuto brings to the table are legitimately invaluable, and you can't just plug any warm body behind the plate and expect the same results. The way he calls a game, his relationship with the pitching staff, his ability to frame pitches and steal strikes for his hurlers, the way he controls the running game and makes opposing teams think twice about taking liberties on the base paths, all of that matters tremendously. The Phillies actually abandoned their carefully constructed plan midway through last season to give JT more regular rest and get him off his feet at a higher rate. They basically looked at the results, said screw it, and went right back to riding him like a rented mule, playing him at the same demanding pace they always had. That should tell you everything you need to know about how much they value what he brings to the table beyond the stat sheet. Now let's address the elephant in the room that's been trumpeting loudly since this announcement dropped. Dave Dombrowski's absolutely brutal press conference where he essentially admitted the quiet part out loud. The quote that has everyone's jaws on the floor came when Dombrowski said, and I quote, "We're content where we are." Content. That's the word choice from a general manager whose team has been knocked out of the playoffs in the NLCS 2 years running, a team that's supposed to be in win-now mode with a championship window that's actively slamming shut. Content is what you say when you're running a small market team that overachieved and you're happy to be there. Content is not what fans of the Philadelphia Phillies want to hear when they've been watching this organization repeatedly fall short of the ultimate goal. The most awkward moment of the entire press conference, and trust me, there were several contenders for this dubious honor, came when everyone involved basically acknowledged that if Bo Naylor had signed with Philadelphia, JT Realmuto would be wearing a different uniform right now. Think about that for a second. They're announcing this big reunion, trying to sell it as a happy homecoming, while simultaneously admitting he was Plan B all along. Realmuto himself said his representation made it clear they always wanted to be back in Philadelphia, but things got a little hairy there at the end, before they finally hammered out a deal. That's professional athlete speak for, I was sweating bullets, wondering if I'd have a job. Dombrowski tried to control the damage by explaining he made a legitimate offer to Naylor that he genuinely believed would get accepted, that he thought they were landing the big fish, and that he didn't think they were being used as leverage to drive up the price with other teams. Spoiler alert, they were totally being used as leverage, and now Naylor is laughing all the way to the bank as a New York Met, which means Phillies fans get to hate him with the burning intensity of 1,000 suns for the next however many years. The optics of this whole situation are just terrible from a public relations standpoint. You've got your veteran catcher, a guy who's given his body and soul to this organization, being told in the most transparent way possible that he wasn't the first choice. You've got a fan base that's already frustrated with a seemingly stagnant offseason, watching their GM declare he's content with a roster that everyone knows isn't better than last year's squad that came up short. You've got a hardworking bench player in Weston Wilson getting shown the door to make room for a catcher who, while still solid, is clearly on the decline. It's a perfect storm of awkwardness that has social media absolutely buzzing with hot takes and frustrated rants from every corner of Phillies Nation. Here's the reality check that nobody really wants to hear but needs to be said. The Phillies didn't really have a better option at catcher than bringing back JT Realmuto, as messy as this whole process turned out to be. The free agent market for catchers was thinner than a piece of paper, and the trade market wasn't exactly overflowing with all-star caliber backstops that teams were willing to part with for reasonable returns. Realmuto, even in his decline phase, is still a high-quality catcher when you compare him to the rest of the league. He's not the elite, top-tier guy he was in his prime, but he's comfortably above average and brings that championship experience and veteran leadership that younger teams would kill to have in their clubhouse. The pathway to upgrading the position wasn't clear, and when you're operating in win-now mode with a roster that has legitimate championship aspirations, sometimes you've got to dance with the date you brought to the prom rather than gambling on an unknown commodity. The frustration from the fan base is completely justified, though, because this whole situation feels like a full runback of last season, and we all know how that movie ended. You simply cannot do the mental gymnastics required to convince anyone with functioning brain cells that this current roster is better than last year's squad or the teams from previous seasons. The pieces are largely the same, maybe a year older and a step slower, and there haven't been any significant additions that make you think this team is better equipped to finally get over the hump and win the whole damn thing. That's what stings the most about Dombrowski's content comment. It reeks of complacency, of settling, of accepting good enough when good enough has repeatedly proven to not be good enough, when October rolls around and the stakes get raised to their highest level. But here's where things get interesting and why we can't completely write off this upcoming season just yet. Dave Dombrowski is not exactly known for being a guy who operates in the spotlight and telegraphs every move months in advance. This is a general manager who has pulled off blockbuster trades and shocking acquisitions seemingly out of thin air, making moves that nobody saw coming until the ink was already dry on the contracts. Just because the offseason has been quiet so far doesn't necessarily mean it's going to stay that way. Spring training is still weeks away, and plenty of time remains for roster construction and last-minute additions that could completely change the complexion of this ball club. Maybe Dombrowski has an ace up his sleeve, some under-the-radar move that's going to make everyone who doubted him eat crow come April, or maybe this really is it, a complete run back with crossed fingers and hopes that things break differently this time around. The JT Realmuto signing also raises questions about how the Phillies view their championship window and what their strategy is moving forward. By committing 3 years and $45 million to a catcher on the wrong side of 30, they're clearly betting that this current core still has enough juice left for multiple legitimate playoff runs. They're not tearing anything down or retooling or any of that corporate speak that means a team is preparing to be bad for a while. This is still very much a win-now roster construction, which means the pressure is going to be absolutely immense come opening day. Bryce Harper needs to maintain the awakening he supposedly had this offseason. The starting rotation needs to stay healthy and dominant. The bullpen needs to not implode in high-leverage situations. And yes, JT Realmuto needs to find something closer to his old form rather than continuing the decline we've witnessed over the past couple seasons. The incentives built into Realmuto's contract create an interesting dynamic that could pay dividends if he's properly motivated by them. $2 million for making the All-Star team is serious money, even for a guy who's earned tens of millions over his career. That gold glove bonus, that silver slugger potential, these aren't just participation trophies we're talking about. They're prestigious awards that come with financial rewards and cement legacy. If JT can tap into that competitive fire, that desire to prove he's not washed up yet, those incentives could be exactly the motivation needed to squeeze out one more quality season or two from a body that's taken tremendous punishment over the years. Athletes are competitive by nature, especially guys who've reached the pinnacle of their profession, and nothing lights a fire under someone quite like people doubting whether they've still got it. The flip side of that coin is Father Time remains undefeated in professional sports, and catching is arguably the most physically demanding position on the diamond. The wear and tear adds up in ways that other positions simply don't experience. The knees start going, the bat speed slows down, the recovery between games takes longer, and suddenly what used to come naturally requires maximum effort just to maintain adequacy. We've seen countless catchers hit that wall in their early to mid-30s and fall off a cliff production-wise. The list of catchers who remained elite past age 35 is remarkably short, and while Realmuto has always been exceptional at taking care of his body and maintaining his conditioning, at some point biology just takes over and there's nothing anyone can do about it. What makes this whole situation even more complicated is the psychological element of how this negotiation went down. Professional athletes have egos, and they should. You don't reach the highest level of competition in any sport without believing you're one of the best to ever do it. Finding out you were the backup plan, the fallback option after the team tried and failed to land someone else, that's got to eat at you on some level, no matter how thick-skinned you are or how much you try to brush it off publicly. Will that create a chip on Realmuto's shoulder that drives him to prove everyone wrong? Or will it create resentment and tension that festers throughout the season when things inevitably get tough? These are legitimate questions that won't be answered until we see this team actually playing meaningful games and dealing with adversity. The Weston Wilson decision also speaks to a larger philosophy about roster construction and how the Phillies view their bench depth moving forward. By keeping guys like Edmundo Sosa and potentially giving more opportunities to younger players, they're betting on upside and potential rather than known quantities with limited ceiling. Wilson was a solid, reliable bench piece who could give you respectable at-bats and play multiple positions, but his upside was always going to be capped as a 31-year-old journeyman. Otto represents the possibility of discovering a genuine everyday player, someone who could force their way into regular playing time through performance rather than being relegated to a bench role by default. It's a gamble, but it's the kind of gamble that contending teams sometimes need to make if they want to find that extra gear that puts them over the top. Looking at the big picture, this entire offseason has been an exercise in frustration for Phillies fans who've watched other teams in their division get better while Philadelphia has largely stood pat. The Mets went out and spent money like a drunken sailor, adding legitimate star power and depth throughout their roster. The Braves are always dangerous because they've got one of the best farm systems in baseball, constantly feeding talent to the major league roster. Even the Nationals, who everyone expected to be terrible, have made some interesting moves that suggest they're trying to accelerate their rebuild. Meanwhile, the Phillies brought back their aging catcher after striking out on their preferred target and told everyone they're content with where things stand. That's not exactly the kind of aggressive, all-in approach that gets fans fired up and believing this is finally going to be the year. So what's the bottom line here? JT Realmuto is back in Philadelphia for at least 3 more years. Weston Wilson is looking for a new home, and the Phillies are running it back with largely the same roster that's fallen short multiple years in a row. Is this the right move? The honest answer is we won't know until we see how it plays out on the field. The numbers suggest this team isn't better than last year, but baseball isn't played on spreadsheets, and stranger things have happened than a veteran roster finding that extra gear when it matters most. Maybe Realmuto rediscovers some of that old magic. Maybe Bryce Harper actually did have some revelation this offseason and comes out absolutely raking. Maybe the pitching staff stays healthy and dominant throughout an entire season for once. Or maybe this is just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic and we're all setting ourselves up for another disappointing October exit. The next few weeks and months are going to be absolutely crucial for this organization. Spring training will tell us a lot about where guys are at physically and mentally. The final roster construction decisions before opening day will reveal whether Dombrowski has any more tricks up his sleeve or if this really is the final product. And then once the games actually start counting, we'll see whether this team has learned from past failures or if they're doomed to repeat them with the same cast of characters in the same roles, having the same problems. One thing's for certain, though. The pressure is on like never before. The fan base is restless, the division's getting tougher, and the championship window is actively slamming shut on this core group of players. This isn't a situation where the Phillies can afford to waste another year spinning their wheels and coming up short. Changes need to happen, whether through addition by subtraction, internal improvements, or external acquisitions. The JT Realmuto signing might be exactly what this team needs, or it might be a desperate attempt to recapture past glory that's already long gone. Time will tell. What do you think about this whole situation? Was cutting Weston Wilson the right move, or should the Phillies have found another way to make room for JT? Do you believe Realmuto can recapture enough of his old form to make this contract worth it? And what about Dombrowski saying he's content with the roster? Does that inspire confidence, or does it feel like waving the white flag before the season even starts? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this is exactly the kind of topic that gets baseball fans fired up and debating for hours. Make sure you smash that subscribe button if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss any updates as this story continues to develop. And drop a like on this video if you appreciated the deep dive into all the layers of this complicated situation. The baseball season is right around the corner, and you can bet we'll be here breaking down every twist and turn as the Phillies try to finally get over the hump and bring championship number 3 back to the city of Brother.